Hey all, so this is going to be part 2 of our Perfect Competition mini-series. And so in part 1, we went over just the characteristics of perfect competition. In part 2, we're looking at the different graphs and types of efficiency, right? So it's really important that you understand what we're talking about and going over in this video itself. Mainly because it's an economics class, you guys need to learn how to manipulate graphs, and if something changes, how does that impact the other curves here? All right? So let's get started, and I hope you guys pay attention. Peace. All right, so part 2 of perfect competition. And so we're really going to focus on shifting all of our different curves, whether it's shifting in the market and how it impacts the firm, right? Or shifting the firm and seeing how it impacts the market. And so we're going to do that, and then we're going to end with efficiency. And so in the long run, what we are going to say is that if a firm is making a profit, it is going to incentivize other firms to enter into the market. If a firm is making a loss, it is going to incentivize other firms to leave the market, right? Because they're going to be making a loss also, which is going to impact our market graph, our firm, and inevitably going to impact our firm graph there. And so here, the reason why firms are able to enter or leave if there's a profit or loss is something that we talked about in our last video. It's the fact that one of the characteristics of a perfectly competitive firm and market structure is that there are very low barriers to entry. And so if a firm is making a profit, right, what are other firms going to do? Well, other firms are going to enter. What happens if a firm's making a loss? Well, other firms are going to leave. And so eventually, in the long run, all firms break even and they make what we're going to call, remember, economic profit. So there is zero, right, economic profit there, which doesn't mean that the firm isn't making any money. Just in the purely economic sense, if we take into account the implicit cost, the opportunity cost of doing business, the firms are breaking even. And so what this means for us, and this is really, really important, is that in the long run, a perfectly competitive firm is extremely efficient. It is the most efficient market structure that we're going to talk about today. There's a reason why it's called perfect competition. It implies that everything about it is efficient. All right. And so here, right, in the long run, this is what your graph should look like, or any single graph for perfectly competitive firms and markets. This is what it looks like. The key factor here is where the ATC marginal cost and our demand curve, which remember is also our marginal revenue, price, and average revenue, right? They all intersect. So in other words, the minimum of the ATC, right? And we'll write it down. The minimum of the ATC should equal our marginal revenue, our marginal cost, and price. Right? So this is the perfect competition long run. And no matter what you do, however you manipulate it, if we're going back to the long run, this is what your graph should always look like at the end of the day. Yet again, in the long run. And so here, right, in the long run equilibrium, if you notice, right, at this point right here, right, the price, which is our demand curve, equals marginal cost, which equals the minimum of the ATC. And we know that the firm isn't making any economic profit, right? Because remember, total revenue is just price times quantity, right? So this portion right here. But then here, we also have the cost right here, right? So the cost and total revenue, the total cost and total revenue are exactly the same. So the firm is making no economic profit. However, it's important to note that the firm is making a positive accounting profit. It's just when we take into account the implicit cost, or when we take into account the opportunity cost, that's when the firm is making zero economic profit here. And so at this point, in long-run equilibrium, there is no incentive for firms to leave or enter into the industry or into the market. The reason being is because if firms are making no economic profit, there is no firms to say, oh, I want to enter. There is no incentive for firms to say, hey, I want to leave, right? So essentially the number of firms is going to stay the same once we're in long run equilibrium here. It's just when the firms are making a profit or a loss, that's when there's incentive for firms to leave or enter into the market or the industry, right? Which are interchangeable terms here. And so let's go from short run to long run. So we're not going to go over the entire guided practice here. Right? We'll probably just go to the first 2 questions, but if you want to check yourself, the answers to each one of these 4 questions are in sort of the notes or the comment section of the Google slide. So real quick, is this the short run or long run? Well, we know automatically, right, that it's the short run. Why? Well, because we go to MR equals MC, right? It hits the ATC, right? The minimum of the ATC does not equal MR equals MC here, right? So because of that, we know it's in the short run. So, but is this firm making a profit or a loss? Well, here, the cost, right, the ATC is lower than the price. So that means that this firm is making a profit. So what are firms going to do in the long run? Well, firms are going to enter into the industry or enter into the market because this firm is making a profit here. And so this is what we're going to show, right? So here, firms enter to earn profit, so the supply increase in the industry, which should make sense, right? If this firm, right, if this graph right here, this firm indicates that that this firm is making a profit, right, then that means more firms are going to enter. So how's that going to impact our industry market graph? Well, that means that the supply of firms is going to increase, or the supply of products is going to increase because now there's more firms entering into the market. And so when that happens, right, our supply curve shifts to the right, to indicate an increase in supply, which means, right, that there is a new equilibrium point. And so once the supply curve shifts to the right, we know, right, that our price is going to decrease and our quantity is going to increase. It's something that we learned in Unit 2. Right? So in other words, right, this is where we should get to, right? Our supply curve shifts to the right, and now we have a new equilibrium price. We also have a new equilibrium quantity, right? Our price fell from $5 to $2, and our quantity increased from 100 to 200. Well, then how does that impact our firm graph here? Well, remember, we said in our last video that firms are price takers, right? They can't set their own price because if they set it too high, no one's going to buy from them because they all sell identical products, perfectly substitutable products, and they're not going to lower their price because they can make more profit by taking what the market gives them. So if our market industry price changed from $5 to $2, what should happen to our demand or really our marginal revenue curve? Well, here, right, it's just going to be at this $2 mark, right? So our marginal revenue curve, ignore that little bump, right, is going to be like this. Or in other words, to clean it up, this is what it's going to look like, right? Our demand curve or our marginal revenue curve, our price curve, because they're all the same thing, decreased because it matched up with this new equilibrium point here. And so when that happens, right, the price falls for firms because they are price takers. And so our price decreases in our firm, right? Our price went from $5 to $2, and our quantity also decreased, right? Because we have a new MR equals MC point, right? Our original point used to be here, right? 0.1, but now it's right here, 0.2. And so now, right, we are at long run equilibrium at $2. Right? So at the new equilibrium price in the market at $2, that brings all the firms into long run equilibrium. And now there is no incentive for firms to leave or enter into the market here. And so here, is this firm going to be, is this short run or long run? Well, here we know it's a short run, right? Because our ATC is above, right? Our ATC point is above our MR equals MC, our price point. So we know it's a short run. Well, we know the firm's making a loss, so what are firms going to do? Well, firms are going to leave the market, right? So when firms leave the market, the supply is going to decrease. That increases equilibrium, and so our marginal revenue price curve is going to shift up, bringing us to long run equilibrium here. All right, so that was short run to the long run. And so the other thing that we can do is we can go from long run to long run. All right, so long run to long run. And so here, this is not necessarily important, right? But it's something that may be covered, so we're going to go over it. The difference in constant and increasing costs. So we're going to go over constant, then go over everything, then we'll introduce increasing, and then we'll leave it at that. So constant cost industry is new firms enter the market. It doesn't increase the cost for the firms already in the market, okay? You don't necessarily need to know this. Like I said, there's only been like one multiple choice question on it in the past couple years, so you just need to really know the definition of it for right now. So here, we are currently in long run equilibrium, right? We know that because we're at the point where minimum of the ATC, right, intersects, and I'll do it in blue to make it stand out a little bit more, right? Minimum of the ATC intersects with our demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost curve, right? This is long run equilibrium. Well, here we have in our, whatever it's called, right? It says, if demand increases, what is that going to do to the short run, and how does it return to the long run here? Well, if demand increases, right, what is going to change first? Well, the first thing that's going to change is our demand curve is going to shift to the right, right? We have a new demand curve because it tells us our demand is shifting to the right here. And so when that happens, right, we have a new equilibrium point, a new equilibrium price, right? So price is going to increase and our quantity is also going to increase in the industry and market. But because our price increased in the market graph, what also has to increase on our firm graph? Well, this demand marginal revenue curve also has to increase, right? Because that marginal revenue demand price curve is always going to be where the equilibrium price is in the market graph. So in other words, it's going to look like this, right? Our demand curve shifted to the right. We have a new equilibrium point where price increased to $10 and our quantity increased to 500. And so on our firm graph, right, we see an increase in our demand curve, in our marginal revenue curve, and our price curve, right? Because remember, demand equals marginal revenue equals price. It also equals average revenue. And so at this point with the firm, right, the price increased, the quantity also increased here. And so profit is being made in the short run. Right, our MR equals MC point is right here. Yet again, we'll do this in blue to make it stand out, right? Our new MR equals MC point is right here, so that's why they're producing 20 units. And then right here is the cost. And so because our price is greater than our cost, this firm is now making a profit. Well, if this firm is making a profit, what are other firms going to do? What incentive do other firms have? Well, other firms now have an incentive to enter into the market. And so how does that change our industry market graph? Well, at that point, right, our supply curve is going to increase, right? Because more firms are entering into the market because this firm was making a profit. And so when that happens, right, we have a new equilibrium point, right, or S1 and D1, right, where our new supply curve and our new demand curve intersect. And so that is going to drop the price back down to $5, which means, right, that our marginal revenue curve, our price curve, our demand curve also is going to drop to reflect that new equilibrium price. And so in other words, this is our new long run equilibrium. And so if you notice, the only thing that changed as we went from long run to long run is the quantity in the industry, right? We used to be producing 100, but now we're producing 600. But in the firm, we're back to 10 units per firm here. All right. And so like I said, I think this is pretty easy because at the end of the day, your graph should look like this in the firm, right? We should be at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost and the minimum of the ATC all intersect with one another. That is long run equilibrium, and that is never going to change. What is going to change, however, is the process from that long run to the long run or from the short run to the long run there. And so this last thing is increasing cost. Like I said, you just have to know the definition for the most part. Increasing cost just means as more firms enter into the market, there are more competition for resources because there's more firms now. And so that is going to drive up the cost of all these resources here. Hence, increasing cost. All right, so the last thing that I want to go over with you guys is efficiency. And so this is pretty easy, right? Because at the end of the day, in perfect competition, they are extremely efficient. Right? And we're going to say being efficient means you're using your scarce resources in the most optimal way. And so the reason why it's called perfect competition is because the firms that are inefficient are basically forced out of the market. The only firms left in perfect competition are the ones that are using their resources efficiently. And so for us, there are two different types of efficiency. The first is productive efficiency, which means you're producing at the lowest possible cost. In other words, you're producing where price equals the minimum of the ATC. That is productively efficient. So a firm is productively efficient if they're producing at the lowest possible cost. And so for ATC is U-shaped, that means they're producing, right, at the minimum of the ATC there. Allocative efficiency means you're producing the amount most desired by society. In other words, you want to produce where MR equals MC, or we can rewrite it to say price equals marginal cost, right? Because we can say marginal revenue equals price in perfect competition. So basically, if you're producing where MR equals MC, the firm is allocatively efficient. So to recap, you are productively efficient if you're producing at the minimum of the ATC, where price intersects with the minimum of the ATC. You are allocatively efficient if you're producing where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, where MR equals MC here. And so here, right, in the short run, the firm is not productively efficient. Why? Well, because here we're producing MR equals MC. That is where the firm is producing, or the cost of the firm. However, right, the minimum of the ATC is where it intersects with the marginal cost curve. So notice at Q1, right, the cost isn't at its minimum point. So in the short run, perfectly competitive firms are not productively efficient. Are they allocatively efficient? Yes. No matter where you are, short run or long run, with perfect competition, a firm is always allocatively efficient because a firm is always going to be producing where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. However, if the firm is in the short run, it doesn't matter whether they're making a profit or a loss, the firm is never going to be productively efficient. A firm is only productively efficient in perfect competition in long run equilibrium, where price equals or marginal revenue equals the minimum of the ATC. Right? So this is what it basically says. In long run equilibrium, is it allocatively efficient? Are we producing where price or marginal revenue equals marginal cost? Yes. Are we productively efficient? Are we producing where price or marginal revenue intersects the minimum of the ATC? Well, yet again, the answer is yes. So in long run equilibrium, that's why it's called perfect competition, everything is 100% efficient, right? We are productively efficient and allocatively efficient in long run equilibrium here. And so yet again, just to recap this point, in perfectly competitive firms are allocatively efficient and productively efficient in the long run. And this is never going to change. This is always going to be 100% true. In the long run, firms in perfect competition are always allocatively efficient, where MR equals MC, and they are always productively efficient, where marginal revenue or price equals the minimum of the ATC. In the short run, right, they are always allocatively efficient, right? In the short run, firms in perfect competition are always allocatively efficient because they're always going to be producing at that profit maximizing point where MR equals MC. However, they're not always productively efficient, right? Because they're never going to be producing at the minimum of the ATC when they're incurring a profit or a loss. Okay? All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.